You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, 5777, 2016. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Breishis. We begin at the beginning of the Torah, and we have the story of Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, famous story. And I'd like to focus in on a particular point within the story that is essential. It's something that, if we understand it properly, it really can apply to our specific times, our specific challenge that we face in our times. The Torah tells us, and this is at the end of chapter 2 of Breishis, of Genesis, Vayiyu shnei marumim v'hadam v'ishtay v'leis bashashu. Adam and Eve, in their original state in the garden, before they had sinned, before they fell from their exalted spiritual state that they began with when they were first created, so they were not clothed. They didn't need any clothing because they weren't embarrassed, the verse tells us. They weren't embarrassed, and as the Sforno explains, as the Meforshim explain, that in their original state, just like for us, when a person looks at the eyes or the nose or the mouth, it has a function, it has a normal function. You can eat, you can smell, you can see, etc. There's no energy around it. It's simple, it's straightforward, and there's nothing selfish about it. It's just used for whatever purpose it's used. So too, the parts of the body that are covered, the parts of the human body which are involved in reproduction, in marital relations, those parts of the body were at that time just as simple. The use of them had no negative energy around them. There was no embarrassment about them. They were just simple parts of the body, and they didn't need to be covered. Now, I want to share with you a Midrash, and I actually don't want to share it for the Midrash itself's sake, meaning I don't want to explain the Midrash. I want to give some thoughts. I want to share with you a few of my own thoughts based on the connection that the Midrash makes. Usually, I'll share with you a Midrash, I'll explain the Midrash. Here we're going to just look at the Midrash, notice the connection that it makes to other places, and we're going to explain that connection in a way which is different than the Midrash. So let's look at the Midrash. It says like this. Vayu shnei marumim. It says that they were both unclothed. Amar b'lezer shleisha hein shalihimtinu b'shalvasan sheishois. There were three people that were not able to maintain their serenity, maintain their peace for 6 hours. The Elohein, Adam Yisrael v'Sisra. The three were the first man, Adam Harishon, the people of Israel, and Sisra, who was one of the enemies of the Jewish people, who was killed by a woman named Yael. Adam shenemar, the verse tells us about Adam, v'lo yisbashashu. The verse tells us they were not embarrassed. The word for embarrassed in Hebrew is ba-shesh, or it comes from the root of busha, which means embarrassment. So that word boshesh, the way it's used here, with two shins, so we can actually split down the word further into ba-shesh, which means 6 hours came, or in this case, v'lo yisbashashu, 6 hours didn't come. Lo bo sheishois v'hu b'shalvasa. He didn't reach 6 hours and remain in his serenity, in his peace. And the Midrash is saying, as the Eitz Yosef explains, that if you look at the calculation, the Gemara tells us exactly what happened, and when it happened, on that sixth day of creation, he was created at a certain time. He was in a state of joy when he got married to his wife, and that occurred in the 7th hour of the day. And then if you calculate, it's only a few hours later that he sinned and he ate from the tree which Hashem had told him not to eat from. So he was in a state of serenity, he was a state of peace, he was a state of perfection for under 6 hours, the Midrash is telling us. He wasn't able to maintain that serenity beyond 6 hours. Now the Midrash tells us that there's another place where we see the same word ba-shesh, which here means that they weren't embarrassed. But elsewhere it seems to mean something else. Yisrael shenemar, in regards to the people of Israel, the verse tells us, Vayara am ki boshesh Moshe. The nation saw, and this was right before the sin of the golden calf, Moses had been on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. They miscalculated the 40 days. They thought he was supposed to come back a day earlier. Jewish people saw ki ba-shesh Moshe, that Moshe had not yet come. He was late. The word in this context of boshesh doesn't mean embarrassed. It means that he was late. Ki bo-sheshois v'lo bo Moshe. Midrash tells us that what does it mean boshesh? That also there were 6 hours had passed. The 6th hour had come. And Moshe Rabbeinu had told him he was going to come at noon. He was going to come down from the mountain. He didn't come. So the Jewish people, as a result of that, they sinned with the sin of the golden calf. In actuality, Moshe came down the following day at noon, instead of the previous day, the day that they thought he was supposed to come down. Moshe Rabbeinu saw that they had sinned. He broke the luchos, he broke the 10 commandments. We all know the story. So the second place where we see the word boshesh, which we're separating into two words of ba-shesh, which means that there are 6 hours that came, and in this context, they weren't able to maintain their fidelity to God through the 6th hour because of the fact that he had not come by the 6th hour. So therefore, we see that the concept of boshesh applies there as well to the Jewish people when they sinned with a golden calf. Sisra, Shenemar, we have a third place where the Torah uses the word boshesh, and that's in regards to one of the enemies of the Jewish people. His name was Sisra, and he had been killed by Yael through an amazing series of events. This man was felled by Yael, and the verse tells us, Madua boshesh rich b'lovoi. Sisra had not yet come home. He had not returned from battle. Why? Because he had been killed. And Sisra's mother was upset. Where is my son Sisra? She was crying. She was worried. And she said, Why is his chariot late from coming? Why is it ba-shesh? What does it mean in this context? Every day he would come back in the 3rd hour of the day, by 9 in the morning, by 4 by 10 in the morning. He would come back from battle. He would make quick work of it. He would return home. It's already the 6th hour, it's already noontime, and he has not yet returned. His mother was upset and was worried. So we see, as the Eitz Yosef explains, that Sisra's downfall occurred in the 6th hour. At this very time when the Jewish people had their downfall with the golden calf, when Adam HaRishon had his own issue with the 6th hour idea, with the 6th hour concept, he couldn't get up to the 6th hour, so to speak. So we see that there's some kind of parallel between these 3 different events, with Adam, with the Jewish people, and with Sisra, the enemy of the Jewish people. Now, I'd like to look at these 3 different places, and I want to understand a few different points. The first point that I want to understand is the word boshesh, which we are translating to mean ba-shesh. Boshesh means 2 different things in 2 different contexts. When it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu coming late and Sisra coming late, the word boshesh means he came late. The 6th hour passed. However, when it comes to Adam HaRishon, when it comes to Adam and Eve, it says that they were naked and they were not embarrassed. The word boshesh in this context means that they were not embarrassed. So what's the connection, or what's the idea, or perhaps the parallel between the concept of ba-shesh, Moshe coming late, the concept of boshesh as coming late, as opposed to boshesh meaning to be embarrassed? What is the idea? Why in one place does it mean one thing, and the same exact word means something different in a different place? Also, it's important to note that despite the fact that the Midrash places these 3 different verses in the same context and creates a parallel between them, seems to say that they're saying the same thing. If you look at the verses carefully, the verse in regards to Adam and Chava is saying really the opposite of what it's saying in regards to Moshe and Sisra. Moshe was late. Ki boshesh Moshe. He didn't come by the 6th hour. Ba-shesh, the 6th hour came and he didn't come. So, but in regards to Adam and Chava, it's saying lo yisboshashu. They didn't experience whatever boshesh means. They weren't embarrassed. They didn't, if we could kind of change it a little bit up and say yisboshashu, let's say that it means they didn't experience the boshesh, the 6th hour coming. Whatever it means that the 6th hour comes, they didn't come late, so to speak. That's what it sounds like. But lo yisboshashu. Adam and Chava are doing something that's the opposite of Moshe and Sisra. So what is the idea? What is the concept? What is the verse in using the same word? What is it trying to teach us? So before I get into answering this, I want to try to focus a little bit on the concept of ayushnem arumim v'lo yisboshashu. What does it mean that they were unclothed but they weren't embarrassed? What is the idea of the embarrassment around the concept of being unclothed? Why does that happen? What is the concept of embarrassment? What is the concept of busha? What is the concept of busha in this area? And really, generally, what is the concept of embarrassment? What is the idea that someone is embarrassed? So, obviously, when we speak about this area, it's a very sensitive place to speak about. So I'm going to speak about it in a different context, and I'm going to leave it to you to draw it back and think about it in this context, in the context of the area of sexuality. I'm going to speak about it in a different context, something that I've experienced personally, And I'm sure that many of you have also experienced it, perhaps in a slightly different way, but you've experienced it nonetheless. And that is in regards to a person's connection to another person. Meaning, what do I mean? We find that there's an idea that when it comes to a famous person, let's say you would see someone extremely famous in the street. You would be walking along and you would meet Barack Obama. So you would be awestruck. I would be awestruck. We would all be starstruck, as we say. The connection that we feel towards that person because they're a famous person is much stronger, obviously, than the connection that they feel towards us. Millions and millions or even billions of people can know, recognize, and feel connected to a particular individual without them being able to feel connected to everyone else. That person is famous, then that's what's going to happen. Now, besides for this being true in regards to a famous person, this is also true in regards to a very talented person that you might have met for the first time, or a very beautiful person that you might be meeting for the first time. A person will feel more connected than the other person will feel. The person meeting that person will feel more connected than the person who's receiving that. And so, in that case, the experience can be one of busha. When somebody meets somebody else in that way, if I would meet you and I would feel more connected to you than you feel towards me, it's embarrassing. A different way of saying it is that when there's a connection which is not fully in place, which is not fully reflecting, which is not where you have both sides feeling the same about each other, so that connection is out of place to a certain extent. The relationship hasn't been developed in in two directions. So that experience is one of embarrassment. Embarrassment is when things are not precisely aligned, when something is out of place. Another example of this is, let's say I meet somebody, and this actually happened to me recently. Let's say I would meet somebody, and they would say to me, "Oh, do you know who I am?" And I would be like, "Oh, I think that you're Reuven Goldstein." And they say, "No, I'm Shimon Silverstein." So when a person makes that mistake and relates to somebody in the wrong way, relates to somebody as if they're somebody else, that's embarrassing. When things are out of place, when they're not aligned, that's called busha, that's called embarrassment. And so Adam and Chava, they were not embarrassed. There was no lack of alignment. Their relationship was perfect. There was nothing there that was inappropriate. Now, where does busha begin? Where does it begin, the concept that things are out of place, that things are inappropriate? It begins with the sin of Adam and Chava. As a result of them eating from the fruit, which was inappropriate, they desired something which was not for them. Hashem said, "This is not for you." So instead of saying, "Oh, it's not for me, I'm not going to eat it," they chose to take something which wasn't really shaykh to them, which wasn't really appropriate for them. As a result of that, they came into a world where it could be possible that things are not aligned, where I want something, let's say, which isn't mine, where the relationship could be out of alignment. Let's say it's possible for me to love somebody and they don't love me back. That's only possible in a world after the chait. It's only possible after this sin. Before this sin, there could only be perfect alignment. Everything was completely aligned. There was no embarrassment. After the sin, they became embarrassed. They realized that they're naked. They realized they don't have any clothes on. They realized that things it's possible now for there to be a person desiring somebody else, even though it's inappropriate. There can be an imbalance in the relationship, and that wasn't possible before. And so afterwards, they become embarrassed, because it's embarrassing when I'm not aligned with reality. As somebody said it to me, I once heard that humility, when a person is humble, so it means that they live with the truth. They're honest about themselves. Humility doesn't mean that I make myself smaller than I am, but it does mean that I don't make myself bigger than I am. It means I'm just right sized. I'm exactly the size I'm supposed to be. That's humility. Now, what is humiliation? Humiliation is where I'm caught not living with the truth, where I'm caught doing something which is not truthful, which is not aligned with who I should be, with who I am. That's called humiliation. That's busha. That's embarrassment. Now let's look for a moment at the concept of Moshe Rabbeinu coming late. Boshesh Moshe, the same word which means embarrassed, also means to come late. In their eyes, the Jewish people looked and they were waiting for Moshe. He hadn't come. He came late. He was late. He had not yet come. That means, what is the idea of coming late? It means that there's an appointed time. It means that there's an appropriate time where there's supposed to be a relationship that's going to be formed. In this case, Moshe Rabbeinu was going to bring down the luchos, he was going to bring down the Torah. The Jewish people were to receive that. It was an appointed time for that relationship to happen. For there to be a zivug, for there to be not just a relationship, but a coupling between God and the Jewish people. Ba-shesh means that the time had come. The time had come. They were ready to receive it, but God was not ready to give it. It means that it's really the same idea, that there's a relationship and it's imbalanced. One person is ready, is in love, is ready to receive the love. The other person is not yet ready to give the love. Boshesh Moshe, he was late, meaning it wasn't yet the time. So for Moshe and the Jewish people, it wasn't the time. It was late. It was off. There was something off. There was a busha. There was an embarrassment. There was a lack of alignment. But for Adam and Chava, in that perfect spiritual state that they were in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, they were aligned. Things were correct. Things were as they were meant to be. Now, something that's important that we need to understand is, why is this concept broken down from the word boshesh, which means to come late or to be embarrassed, to the words ba-shesh, which means that the sixth hour came. What is the concept of the sixth hour? What is the idea of the number 6? How does it relate to the idea that we're speaking about of embarrassment or lack of embarrassment? Also important to understand is that we see that it's not just the sixth hour that we're speaking about here. As the Midrash tells us in Shmos, in regards to the verses that speak about the fact that Moshe was late, so that means that the sixth hour had passed, Moshe didn't come. Immediately after that is when the Jewish people sin with the golden calf. They sin in the 7th hour. And in fact, we started off our conversation about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, that when were they coupled? When were they brought into a union? And I don't mean a physical union, but when did they become unified as man and wife? Our Chazal tell us it happened in the 7th hour. It happened after the 6th hour. It happened in the 7th hour. So the concept of 6 and 7 are clearly connected. Because Moshe didn't come in the 6th hour, that's when they sinned in the 7th hour. And it's important to note, the following day when he does come, he would have come at the end of the 6th hour. And they would have received the Torah in the 7th hour as well. They would have received that relationship in the 7th hour. So what is the idea of 6 and 7, as we've explained in the past? The concept of the number 6 always corresponds, really the first 6, the 6 days of the week, let's say, correspond to the male aspect. And the 7th aspect is the female aspect. And so the point where 6 and 7 join, which for example in the days of the week is Friday night, it's Friday going into Shabbos. So that is the coupling. That's the time where the two concepts meet, male and female meet. And indeed there's a zivug, there's a coupling, the coming together. And it's why we talk about Shabbos Shalom, that there's a special greeting on Shabbos of peace. That's why we have the candles on Friday night, which denote that are meant to bring about peace in the home so that they can see the man and his wife. There's one keneged the man, one keneged the woman. The idea of 6, and at the point where it connects to 7, is that place of peace. It's that place where relationship is possible. And it's that place where relationship is manifest. So now when we speak about boshesh, when we speak about the 6th hour coming, we're really speaking about the completion of the 6th hour into the 7th hour, the potential for relationship, the potential for alignment between two different people or two different parties. In the case of Moshe Rabbeinu, God and the Jewish people. And I wish I could get into Sisra. I don't think I'm going to have time to do that. But certainly we also see in regards to Adam and Chava that they were not embarrassed. It was the time had come. There was perfect alignment. The ba-shesh, the 6th hour had come, and they were able, because there was no problem of disalignment, they were able to come into that relationship at the end of the 6th hour into the 7th hour. So 6 denotes the male, 7 denotes the female. That point of connection, that point of realization of the relationship is the 6th hour, the end of the 6th hour, and into the 7th hour. Similarly, correspondingly, end of the 6th day of the week into the 7th day of the week. Now, it's also a time, the 6th and 7th hour are also a time, if there's a lack of alignment, if there's a lack of proper connection, if things are boshesh, if things are late, if things are off, there's embarrassment, there's not proper connection. So it's a time of danger. It's a time, if it's not properly done, if it's not done in the right time, so it's a time where we could end up in a lack of relationship, where there could be embarrassment, there could be a lateness, so to speak. Now, how does this apply to us? Why am I talking about this? And I said at the very beginning, there's something amazing and powerful that applies to us. And this idea is something which I shared a number of years ago, but it's so important and so powerful, and it comes up right here, right at Breishis, that I wanted to share with you once again. And the idea has to do with the hours of the day, of the celestial day. What do I mean, the celestial day? I mean that each 1,000 years since creation, every single 1,000 years, we're in the year 5,777. That means that we've had 5 full days. 1,000 years is a day. We've had 5 full days. We are now in the 6th day. We're in the 6th day of reality, because each 1,000 years is a full day, is a full 24-hour period in God's eyes, as it were. Now, if you take the 24-hour period of the 6th day, we are now on Yom HaShishi, we're on that 6th day of creation, we're on that day when man was created, so to speak. And we follow the hours based on what's going on in our Parsha, what we've been speaking about. So the year 5,000 to 5,500, that is the nighttime. By Erev, by Vokar, the evening comes before the day. So that's the first half of the day. Now, if you take 1,000 years and you divide it by 24 hours, which correspond to the 24 hours of the day, you will find that 41 years and 2/3 years, every 41 and 2/3 years, is considered an hour. Now, if you take the time period that we're in now, you will find that we are actually in the 7th hour of the day. From 1948, interestingly, until 1990 was the 6th hour of the day. That was the getting ready. That was the time when we were getting ready for our relationship with Hashem, as it were. The 7th hour of the day, which is the time that we're in now, is from 1990 until 2031. This is the time that this Midrash is speaking about. So this is the time that we have an opportunity, amazingly, to either be in alignment, in a state like Adam and Chava Koydem Achet, where everything was perfect and appropriate, and the relationship, there was no embarrassment, there was no lack of alignment, or we could be in a state of Moshe, coming late, so to speak, where the Jewish people misperceived, were off. If there's a lack of alignment, so if we're not properly ready to receive the relationship, if either Hashem wants to give us more than we're ready to receive, or we want to receive more than God is ready to give, in either of these cases, heaven forbid, we end up with humiliation, we end up with busha, we end up with boshesh, we end up with that embarrassment. But we have an opportunity, specifically at this important juncture in history, in time, in celestial time, in the big picture, we have an incredible opportunity to focus on and try to get into the place where there's an appropriate relationship. And I want to make mention, and again delicately, of the fact that we know that when it comes to a relationship between a man and his wife, so there's an appropriate place where that when things are done correctly, when they're done al pi halacha, when they're done based on the directives of our Chazal and based on the Torah, so there is a place where indeed they come into that relationship and there's no embarrassment. And the other way around, it's the most holy of all of the relationships that we have, and it brings a neshama into the world. A soul comes out from the highest spheres, and a human being can be created at that time, at that point. So we see, and it's important to understand that when things are aligned properly, we return to a state of Adam and Chava Koydem Achet. We return to that state when things are done properly based on the Torah. When things are done incorrectly, so that creates a state of busha, of embarrassment. And that's the embarrassment that we feel, the humiliation that one feels, heaven forbid, when they do a sin, when someone's involved in something that's inappropriate. So that's the humiliation. The humiliation is when I'm doing something which is not aligned, when it becomes clear that I'm not aligned. But the times that we are living in now are these times that are being spoken of in this verse. And so there's an amazing opportunity, and I want to bless you, and I ask you to please bless me back. Hashem should help us, that we should be able to recognize the opportunity to get into a place of veloyis ba-shesh, of not being embarrassed, to get into a place where we align properly with our relationship with those around us, with our relationship with Hashem, with God, and in our relationships with ourselves. If we can understand that there's an appropriate time, there's an appropriate place for every relationship, for every aspect of our different relationships, so then we'll be able to start off this new year with a different appreciation for the time that we have, the time that we're living in. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.